when I lack clarity as a leader, and it has forced me to become clearer and clearer with my expectations and how I deliver those expectations. And also, as a company scales, how you deliver those changes a lot.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Listen, if you're enjoying this show, do me one quick little favor and help me help you. Leave us a rating and review so we can hear what you love about the show and get any insights to make you work harder for your investing goals. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Today, we've got a great show. We're going to be talking to Jered. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to kasmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to kasmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button today. Jered is a multifamily owner, operator, and syndicator focused on the Cincinnati, Ohio market. With humble beginnings in the industry as an apartment maintenance technician, Jered has spent the last 15 years using his background in construction and property management to build his vertically integrated investment firm, SNS Capital Group. Known for their ability to add value and operate efficiently for long-term cash flow, Jered and his team have over $100 million in assets under management. Let's welcome to the show, Jered Sturm. Jered, how are you today?
I'm doing great. And I know before we hit record, I thanked you for having me on, but I'll thank you again. And then also anyone who produces the show and works on the back end to make this happen. I'm really appreciative of all the hard work that goes into creating a platform to allow me to share my story.
Jered, great to have you on, and I've gotten to know you a little bit over the last couple of years, from a distance, but get to see each other from time to time. But it's great to actually have an in-depth conversation and dig into your background. I went over your bio at a very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing my bio. I think maybe it's a little bit out of date. I would say I'm probably 16 years in now, but it's been a long run. I'm relatively young for someone who's been in the industry for 16 years, but that's because I got an early start. So in high school, I started, as you said, as a maintenance tech working for another local landlord here in the Cincinnati, Ohio market. And for him, I was doing the typical maintenance tech stuff, right? I was the guy changing the toilets, hanging the blinds, painting the apartments, fixing whatever breaks. And that in high school developed into like friends and family asking, can you fix this? Can you fix that? And my answer was always yes, because I just was naturally inclined with the trades and seemed to be able to figure it out. And then that slowly evolved into, can you also redo my bathroom? Can you redo my kitchen? And so as I exited high school, I was doing with my brother, who's my business partner today, kitchens and bathrooms, and that evolved into doing like full home additions, to where we were running a construction company doing higher end kitchens, bathrooms, and home remodeling for homeowners. And then 2008 came around, and we kind of looked around and said, hey, why are we working on other people's houses? Let's buy some of these foreclosures. And for several years, we ran our construction company where by the day or by normal business hours, we would go and do a high-end kitchen or bathroom and make, 20, 30, 40 grand in profit. And then keep in mind, this is like 2008 through 2010, we would turn around, take that 20, 30, 40 grand here in Cincinnati, Ohio, and go buy a house. And at the time, no one would lend to us. And so we were buying all cash and renovating all cash. And we would go in and substitute our lack of capital at the time for sweat equity. And we would renovate these properties. And we made the wise decision not to flip them, but to rent them out. And slowly but surely built up our rental portfolio by buying distressed assets, fixing them up through our own efforts. And then eventually, after we got to 8 houses, we were able to find a lender to let us strip the equity that we had forced depreciation into these assets. And then we redeployed that into more assets. And really, our business plan 16 years later hasn't changed all that much. It's just grown in size. So we buy, 100 plus unit apartment communities and do the same thing where we go in, we renovate, we force appreciation, we strip the equity, and then we run that asset for, long-term, consistent, predictable cash flow.
I love it, man. You talked about, being in high school and working as a maintenance tech with a local investor, taking that, getting a request to, hey, can you fix this around my house? Doing some little odds and end jobs here and there. That ultimately becoming more of a bathroom and kitchen renovation, then a full-on construction company, and then ultimately moving into your own flip projects in the single family space. And then from there, doing it just on a larger scale with SNS Capital, where now you've accumulated over $100 million worth of assets and having more of this long-term view. Two things. One, I want to talk about, how you kind of got in first, and then I want to talk about that long-term view. But you mentioned, kind of getting this job while you were still in high school. How did that happen? I mean, is this a family friend? Were you specifically looking to get in as a maintenance tech? I mean, how did you come across this initial job?
So, great question. I was a terrible academic student. So like the academics just didn't click with me. So being dyslexic basically means I'm bad at reading and writing, right? But the whole academic system revolves around reading and writing. But there was one course in my high school that I did really well in, and that was woodworking. And so, most of my high school, I tried to skip English and go to the wood shop. And my senior year, there was a program where I could leave and work full time as long as I came to school and got my 45 minutes of English credit, and then I could leave and go work full time. So I signed up for that program. And at the time, my brother was dating some girl where his dad was a landlord, or her dad was a landlord. And so he offered the job, and we really started doing that, me and my brother, as the guys who did eviction set outs. So we would just go take the stuff and set it on the curb. And then he'd be like, hey, can you hang blinds? And we're like, yeah, we can hang blinds. Um, and just over time, saying yes, working hard, building up that skill set, but working full time through high school. And this is 16, 17, maybe 18 years ago now. Making $15 an hour was a lot because obviously my expenses were low. I was living with mom and dad, but it allowed me to save up enough money that the day I graduated high school, I also bought a 6-bedroom house. And for those who are familiar with Cincinnati, like yourself, in Lockland, right? So not the greatest area, but we bought a 6-bedroom house that I moved into right out of high school and rented the other bedrooms to friends. And that really kicked off the landlording activity as well.
So it's interesting, right? And I think this is one of our first insights. You said something kind of in passing, but I think it was really relevant. You just said yes, right?
Mhm.
You had different opportunities, and whether you fully understood how to do it at that time or not, you said yes, and you invested enough time and energy to figure it out, right? You knew there was a challenge, someone needed something done. You said yes and figured it out. And I think that's the first thing is people often get in their own way because they don't know how to do something or they can't see the end of it, right? Oh, well, I've never done that before, so I don't want to take that project on. You said yes and figured it out, right? You were savvy enough and resourceful enough to figure out how to do it, and that opened you up to more and more opportunities. And it all started from, being kind of this eviction processor where you're going in apartments and can you lift stuff? Yeah, I can do that, right? I can pick up this couch and put it out on the curb. That's easy. And then he goes to, can you hang blinds? Can you do other things? And it starts to evolve from there. So I think it's really important for people just to be open to it, right? Saying yes to these opportunities and see where they take you. The second thing I want to get into, though, is more of your long-term viewpoint, right? In a lot of ways, it's that BRRRR strategy, the buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat, and you're just doing it on a larger scale. I know you mentioned that you didn't really have access to credit and couldn't get loans early on, and that kind of really sparked you to use cash and then refinance down the road. Why why did you stick to that strategy as opposed to maybe evolving once you did have more access to capital?
So I would say it certainly has evolved. There's just a lot of similarities to what we do today to what we did then. But we're more sophisticated in our use of leverage now than we were back then, and it's a very different landscape, right? So I was an 18, 19, 20-year-old at the depths of the biggest financial recession that we've seen. No one was lending to me. I didn't have a W-2 job. It was all 1099 or under the table, and it just was not. So I was not someone who a bank was going to open their book to at the time, and so we were forced to buy cash. But as far as using leverage, it's become much more sophisticated in how we approach it now. But the similarities is that we find distress, force appreciation, strip the equity, and then continue to hold that asset.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying that. So let's talk about that part, right? Because you do have more of a longer term hold as
Yep.
opposed to, many operators that look to buy a property, renovate it and then sell it maybe in 3, 4, 5 years is a long hold for some of these people, right? So
Yep.
for you, that's not exactly your approach. Just talk to me about your approach and why do you have more of a longer term viewpoint on these assets?
Yeah. So like today, if an investor or someone were to ask me what is our typical business model on the assets we're buying, it would be a 10-year hold. So usually around year 2 or 3, we force the appreciation and we're trying to strip that equity through a debt restructuring or refinance. So that's our typical business model, but a 10-year hold does tend to trend on the longer end. And I think what that comes back to and why we choose that model is not that it's the right way, but it is the right way for us because our core competency at SNS is operations. And so if we want to maximize our core competency and really lean on that, the best way to do that is to hold long term and give us the opportunity to operate those rather than just flip them, sell them, and move on to the next one. Like we can realize the forced appreciation through a debt restructure or refinance and do that tax free. But then the next 7 to 8 years produce that consistent, predictable cash flow because of how efficiently we can operate.
I love what you said. You talked about it's not necessarily the best strategy, but it is the best strategy for us. And I think
Mm-hmm.
so many times investors just do things because that's how others are doing it. And they're not looking internally to say, what are we skilled at? What's our strong suit? How do we maximize this based on our abilities and leveraging things that way? So you were able to do that, recognizing that your core competency was actually in the operational side. You're able to give investors their money back earlier through this refinance, but you're staying into the deal on a little bit of a longer hold period. So that's really good insight because, again, I want people to think about different ways of making deals work as opposed to just going in, increasing the value and selling the asset right away. Sometimes that's a great strategy. But on the
Mm-hmm.
same note, if you've got the ability to own and operate an asset and do it very efficiently, there may be benefits in staying in it long term. What are some of the drawbacks from that strategy?
Well, if you're talking about from an investor's perspective, the churn of capital, right? Like, so some investors are looking for that quick churn of capital. There is risk that in that business model that I just described, that at year 2 or 3, maybe the real estate markets or the debt markets don't support a refinance. And so the churn of capital is not as quick. And so it's just more about that consistent, predictable cash flow. But if you're an investor that says, like, I want to do a ground up development where I see no cash flow, and then in year 3, we sell this off to an operator and I get all my money back, and then I go look for another investment, that model maybe caters to that churn of capital more. But there's a lot of investors that say, I don't want it back, right? That's another decision I have to make. I would rather leave it in and produce a better yield, just long-term quarterly distributions. And so again, there's no right or wrong. And you, at the beginning of the show or before we were recording, John, you said like your audience, some of them are, you highlighted a nugget there of like asking yourself as an operator or an active investor, what is your core competency? But you also mentioned your audience, some of them being potentially LPs or trying to get into passive investing. And I think it's important to also ask, like, if they're considering a syndication sponsor, asking the question, what is this syndication sponsor's core competency? And does that align with my goals? And again, there's no right or wrong, but there could be, like, if I'm saying SNS's is operations, there could be another group that their core competency is sales, marketing, and raising capital. And again, I'm not saying one is right or wrong, but if that's that group's core competency, then a churn of that money and raising capital for more deals. We particularly don't love raising capital. It's just like that's something we have to do to fuel our core competency. Where if it's a group that's very good at raising capital, they should be doing that more often. So hopefully that's something that both pieces of your audience can take away, is like, you really need to think about, what is this group really good at? Or if you're a sponsor yourself, what am I really good at?
And I think to your point, for those who are looking to grow, particularly on the active side, think about that for yourself. What are you really good at? You might not have the ability to invest the time and energy to get the experience that Jered and his team have, right? You heard Jered talk about from high school. He was, working in property management to some aspect, right? And developed that into a construction background and, ultimately into this asset management business that he has now. You may not want to wait the amount of time it takes to develop that as your core competency. Maybe there's another skill that you bring to the table. So it may make sense. It may make sense for you to take whatever skills you have and then find that competency from someone else and align with those individuals so that you can make a great partnership. Jered, I heard you say that you don't necessarily care to raise capital, meaning it's not your core competency, but you recognize it's an important aspect of the business. So again, that could be an opportunity for someone else who maybe loves that side of the business to say, okay, well, maybe that's a place where I can find an operator who's great at the operational side. Maybe their core competency isn't in raising capital, but maybe I can plug in and that way we can kind of, shore up the business there. And I think that's the great thing about, real estate, syndications, large scale commercial real estate in general is whatever you bring to the table, it's valuable. You just have to figure out where that value lies. Who do you connect with? How can you be of value? Who do you help? And there's no one way of doing this, right? There are lots of different structures that I've seen, lots of different groups. It just comes down to understanding what you're really good at and then finding groups that can supplement that with other skill sets. Jered, you've talked about the operational side. Let's dig into that, right? First and foremost, what's your philosophy when it comes to operations? And we can call it operation/asset management.
Mm. So I think if I was going to try to boil it down into like a sound bite, I would say that investment returns are supported by on-site operations, but on-site operate, and most groups know that, most investors know that, right? Investment returns are supported by on-site operations, but the step further that I think a lot of people miss is on-site operations are supported by the people who work there. And so it is so important on who is operating that. And so, I do have a lot of experience and a good track record of operations, but I'm not the one leasing anymore, right? I'm not the maintenance tech anymore. I'm not the person who makes sure the grounds are good or that the cars in the parking lot look good. Like there are people who do that on our team now. And having those right people that have the core values that align with our organization, that is where operations really is successful. So it's the people who support operations that's key to making them good.
I love that quote, man. You said the investment returns are really driven by the on-site operations, but the on-site operations are supported by the people on the ground. And then you talked about the core values of those people, making sure that their core values match the company's core values. And that allows you to thrive and grow and scale. And you're not the one taking those phone calls. You're not the ones leasing the units. You're not the one, calling the city or calling these tenants about their cars and all these kind of things. I know for a lot of people, when you get into the management and the delegation of tasks, that's where things may start to break down, when you're hiring folks. And right now we're experiencing a large labor shortage, particularly in the skilled labor workforce. So that's becoming a bigger and bigger challenge for most operators. Can you talk to me about your core values and how you're able to find these individuals that really represent what the company is looking to do and also how you retain them?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing challenge always. I'd say I don't have it figured out, but I'm happy with the results we've been able to produce. Our core values: reliable, driven, team oriented, always do the right thing, and having a positive attitude. And so when we recruit and hire, half of our interview process is about competency, and the other half is about core values. And so the questions we have in our interview, there's actually I think it's a Google Doc, but our interview team is asking questions that are open-ended, and then it prompts them to listen to specific core values. So it'll be something like, tell me a constructive criticism that you've received in the past from bosses that you've had. And we want to know, is this person always continuously improving? Are they how do they answer that question? And it will prompt our interview team to what to listen for, which core value to listen for. And then we score those answers. And then we're hiring people that score high on core values. But we don't want to just say like, oh, you're interviewing for a maintenance tech and you do really well on the competency quiz because you know how to fix an air conditioner, but you're a jerk, right? Like that's never going to work, and it's just going to be a toxic environment to our team. And so we put a lot of emphasis on core values when screening new hires. And then something I've done is I created a vision magazine. So it's basically what our company will look like, feel like, act like in 3 years from now. And anytime someone interviews, we give them that magazine and we say, like, this is what you're joining if you say yes to, because here's where we're going. And then we're empowering them them and our whole team to reverse engineer and build that. So that way I can get out of the way and let them do their job. And so those two things have been really impactful. And now at about 50 employees, it really has snowballed to where the embodiment of the values doesn't, it starts with me, but there's a lot of people that are already have embodied those, and it is like continuing, and the momentum is there to where now it is a part of our organization. And I think that helps with retention, is if you can get the right people who really see the values in that and enjoy working in that type of like high standard environment, they tend to stay.
I love how you talked about the core values and recognizing that is, I think 50 or 60% of what you're hiring for is
Mhm.
looking for that and asking open-ended questions and listening for the cues that represent those core values and hiring for that. Because again, there's competency in the ability of doing something. There's the experience and, being able to look at someone's resume and saying, oh, okay, this person was a property manager for, 10 years. Certainly they know how to do property management, but do they match our core values? Is this the kind of person who elicits, the emotions and kind of the emotional intelligence of, the teamwork, camaraderie, whatever things that you value. And I know that's really challenging, especially when, you kind of need to get a role filled and you don't want to, waste too much time going through a whole bunch of different resumes. I know that's a challenge for a lot of people, but, quite frankly, taking that time, it allows you to get the right people and create the right culture. I had a question for me the other day, which I thought was really interesting. And you're at a place where I think I'd love for you to answer this question. But for someone who is at the early stages, think back to when it was just you and your partners and you were ready to scale and make those initial hires. Talk to me about your process. What roles did you look to fill first, and why did you take that approach?
Yeah, I'm happy to share my story, but I would say I didn't know what I didn't know, and I wouldn't suggest my path for anyone else because it might not be the right path. But really, we would just bang our head into the wall until like it was at capacity, and then we'd be like, we just can't. We need to hire someone, right? Um, some of the early hires were like a maintenance tech and a leasing agent. And then as we would grow, maybe another maintenance tech and another leasing agent. And then all of a sudden we needed a property manager. And it was all about just pushing ourselves to capacity. And then once we hit that capacity threshold, it was like, all right, delegate it off. And a lot of times we would make those hires without having a full understanding of what exactly we needed, which is not great because now today, like we have a very, very descriptive, we break out each core responsibility for each role in our organization. We tell them how they can meet our expectation, exceed our expectation, or fall short of it for every single role. It's very well defined. But back then it was like, I just can't do it anymore. I'm running out of time. Like I can only change my clothes from maintenance tech to leasing agent so many times in a day. I need to make a hire. And so it was all about capacity and just where we were hitting breaking points and bottlenecks and then making the hire in that point. Usually too late, in my opinion, in hindsight.
I think that's helpful though, because there's nothing wrong. And again, I know hindsight's 2020, but the reality is that sometimes that pain just needs to be high enough where it's time to hire somebody because I can't do this anymore. I know one of the challenge most entrepreneurs face is they're hesitant to hire someone and then pay out, this salary or this role and be on the hook for that if they feel they don't have to, right? So there kind of almost needs to be a little bit of pain where they feel like, hey, not hiring this person is worse than going ahead and making the investment at this time. Did you ever think about that aspect of it as far as, hey, when you're hiring maybe before you need that person, whether it's a $40,000, $50,000 salary, whatever it is that you're committing to, and recognizing, ooh, that's a big commitment at this point. Did you have any experience with that, or what are your thoughts there?
Oh, for sure. In the beginning, we weren't making that much money, and what money was coming off the business was going right back into it. And so, you know, I shared the beginning of our story. Like I was driving a Dodge Ram truck that the driver's door and driver's window didn't work, so I'd have to climb in through the passenger side. And it's like making a hire at that time is scary. And frankly, I didn't do it. Right, I would just continue to do it myself until I hit absolute breaking point. But I always think of it as like, if you've heard of it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like at first I was just making sure I could pay my bills. And like eventually the business got to the point where it covered my bills. And then it was like, okay, well now I'm starting a family. Can I cover my family? You know, and it's like, okay, I got that. And then it's like, can this business produce enough revenue to help me find fulfillment in life? And it's like, okay, it's doing that. And now where I'm at is I'm very fortunate position. It's like there's enough safety net and excess capital that I can be very proactive in hiring, right? Like we have an HR person now, and we're talking about executive assistants and these accounting roles that we were talking about hiring a data analyst to like just push us into the next level. These are roles that we might not need today, but will accelerate us into that next level. I think if someone has the guts as an entrepreneur to do that early on, that's amazing. I didn't, right? I didn't have those. I would just, and that's why it's been 16 years, right? That's a long time. And so it took me 16 years to scale, is because I was taking what would be labeled as like a safer path. But again, no right or wrong if someone wants to scale quicker.
And I think that's helpful for people to understand, right? Is that, again, sometimes you've got to be patient. There's a pain, but there's also a commitment level that comes with it. You were committed to the growth. It just took time before that pain got to the point where you said, you know what, we've got to make this investment. We just have to make this investment now. And ultimately, that investment paid off for you. Let's talk a little bit more about kind of the business as it stands today. Like when you're looking for deals and looking for opportunities, what is your buy box?
So we're exclusive to the Cincinnati, Ohio market. And again, that comes back to the comment we made earlier, is like our core competency is operations. The further I get away from home base, the more I lose that core competency. So geographically, we're very tight on what we buy. So just the greater Cincinnati, Ohio market. Typically for us, it's going to be that C to B class asset, and that definition is different for everybody. But we're kind of in the middle range of what the market provides. And then for us, 100+ unit apartment communities where we're buying now, we look for distress, but distress comes in many forms and facets. Like you and your audience know that it's not like here's this one glaring item that we just go in and polish up. Usually it's on every single line item in the income statement. There's some way to tweak it. It's the combination of all of those that then help us force that appreciation. So we are looking for what would be like the term value add, but it's not a glaring one thing that says distressed interiors equals rental increases. Sometimes it's that, usually it's a lot of other things as well. But going back to my background and tying it into the buy box, like you asked, is with my experience in construction and property management, usually we're looking for distress that come into those two buckets, right? Construction distress and property management is usually what triggers us to say we're interested, because that's where we can excel. That's where we can force appreciation. So summing all that up, 100+ apartment communities, C to B class assets, Cincinnati, Ohio, with ways for us to force appreciation.
I love that you tied it back to your core competency, right? And for our listeners, it's so important to make your buy box, right? Your criteria should be yours. I often talk to investors, and this was a mistake I made early on, right? Was when I set my criteria, well, I just set that criteria based on what other folks told me to look for, right? B class assets built in 1980s or newer, whatever it was, right? So I had this generic buy box, but I didn't understand why it was my buy box. It
Mm-hmm.
was just what other people were doing. And guess what? I couldn't find that property because the market I was in, the supply didn't really exist. And then when you did come across it, the numbers and the purchase price was way beyond where we found value. So we had to re-engineer what that criteria was for us. And I think that's really important for people to understand what your criteria is for you. So whether you hear me or Jered or whoever else say, hey, buy properties list, understand why we're
Mm-hmm.
saying that. And then if you have an advantage or you have a disadvantage, then you need to make, adjustments accordingly. So, a lot of times you'll hear people say, hey, 1978 or newer on the age. And a lot of times that's due to, paint, is due to electrical issues. But if you have the ability to navigate through those, then you can buy older properties, right? Assuming that you have the ability to upgrade mechanicals and other things like that. But you can adjust your buy box accordingly. So don't just go with some, blanket statement because you heard someone else say, hey, this is the kind of property they're looking for. Make sure you understand your core competency and then how that comes into effect when you are looking at these different assets. Jered, I want to ask you one other thing, right? You understand the operational side. You also talk to a lot of other investors who have challenges or face different issues when it comes to the operational side. What are some common mistakes you see other operators making when it comes to the operational side of the business?
Well, I don't talk to a ton of other operators. Like, so my nose is against the grindstone. I'm focused on our business. So I have some, and usually it's through our investors that invest in other operators, and then I'll hear some kind of things. But it's all kind of a game of telephone because I'm not getting that direct feedback of like these are the issues. But recently it's the debt structure and how that then impacts your operations. And so, SNS has elected to do all long-term fixed rate debt, and we always have. And so that allows us to focus on our operations in an environment where interest rates are shooting up and putting pressure on some other operators. So that's one component of it. But I think a way I'll answer this is like if someone's saying their core competency is operations, if you're considering investing with them, or if you're an active investor who's going to say that comment, the first thing you should be able to answer is like, great, what KPIs do you track to make sure that's true? And so it's like, we have lots of different KPIs for different, and KPI is key performance indicator acronym. But in our business, each role has their own few KPIs. Maybe it's one, maybe it's three, but these are like the metrics that we track to tell if this role is producing the results and hitting the targets that we're after. Because ultimately, that's what operations is like translating actions into these defined results and hitting budgets. And so I'll give you an example just to help dig in here. So like, everybody who's even a decent owner operator is going to know vacancy or occupancy, right? Like that's a number, the metric that even mildly sophisticated operators should be tracking. But it's like we break down vacancy into the components of vacancy, right? So think about from the time a resident moves out to the time a resident moves in, there's different people in different departments working on those processes and that workflow. So there's from the time the resident moves out to the time the construction starts, and that's like project management and how quickly can we get to it. Then there's the time the construction starts to the time the construction finishes. That's the tradesmen, that's the people who are actually doing the job, and all of that's in-house for us. So we track that. And then there's from the time the construction finishes to the time that the new resident moves in. That's our sales and leasing department, right? And so we're tracking all of these as a KPI to ensure that not only our vacancy is good, but the components of our vacancy is good. And so you'll have to remind me what your original question is, but I think it's such a important thing to say, like, what KPIs are you tracking to make sure your operations are good? Because
Yeah,
you
we're
can say good, but are they?
Yeah, no, we're talking about, just common issues or mistakes that operators make or face. And you talked about, the interest rate environment certainly is having an impact on a lot of people. But then also, I'm going to take what you said if I'm trying to directly answer the question as not tracking the appropriate KPIs, right? So what
Right.
KPIs are you tracking? Or if you're not tracking the right ones, it's hard to really be efficient at operations. And I love your example because I think one of the benefits you have being vertically integrated, meaning that you have the property management company, you're the owner investor yourself, so you kind of have control over the entire operation, is you can get into the weeds, right? You can get into the weeds of not just vacancy, but the turn time, and then literally understanding, how much time from the time the unit was move-in ready to the time we actually had a resident move in, How much
Mhm.
time is this unit down? At what point did we start marking the unit? Can we tighten that up? Can we tighten this up? You have the ability to oversee that. A lot of times when you work with third-party management, you have some oversight to that and some line of sight, but usually not at the nuance level unless you're really asking tough questions and you're working with a good PM who's going to give you all that access. So I think that's really helpful for people to understand is just really being in the weeds in the business, right? If you're going to run operations, you really have to understand what's going on, where there might be challenges, where you might have some exposure, where you need to tighten up, where you need to create new processes to get better and improve. So all that is very helpful. I know we talked about being vertically integrated, right? And running kind of your own portfolio. Do you work with other owners at all and do a third party management?
No, none. Yeah, and I don't ever intend to either. I would say property management is the least fun, least profitable, most important component of real estate investment. So, like, we're very good at it, and we do it for a reason, and that's to control the valuation of our assets. And so, if we don't own it, then we don't get that component of the property management. And so, we only do it for ones that we own. But yeah, I think you did a much better job of answering your previous question than I did, or summarizing my
You
question or
answered
my
the question. I just flipped it. That's
yeah.
all.
KPIs are so important to be able to know what you're targeting and what you're tracking. And so if you're hiring a third party manager, very often all you get is like a budget variance report, right? Like where are we over, where are we under, where it's like, well, what actions were happening that created that variance? And that's what KPIs can help you identify.
And I think to your point, you have to know where to look, and that comes with some experience and time. But if you're looking at the numbers, you're asking better questions, you're digging into the process, you'll start to uncover where the real challenges are. And because you don't work with third party, I'll say this, right? What happens, and you probably see this even with your team members, you have to really identify what the real problem is. Is it a systemic problem? Is it a process problem? Or is it a people problem? And sometimes it's not clear, right? If you have vacancy higher than you expected, okay, I don't know if it's a market situation. Are we, marking the property at a rent that's higher than where the market is today? Or like, you have to really dive into it to figure out what's the real issue. And then is this a one-off issue or is this continuing to happen? And then you got to take a look at that entire process and reconstruct it. And a lot of times it's hard when you're working with a third party management because they can get really defensive about their processes and they may feel attacked, right? So you've got another company, another entity that you're kind of dealing with. So it can be a little challenging, particularly if you don't have great interpersonal skills. So it could be a little bit of a challenging conversation versus when you're completely internal, then it's more about we just got to fix this. Like, yes, I understand you might be feel a little threatened if I'm talking about, you've got to tighten something up on your role of responsibility, but ultimately we've got to solve this issue. So these are the nuances that are a little harder to get into when it comes to, asset management or operations. But I think it's really important if you want to be a great operator. For folks who are interested in learning a little bit more about you and what you've got going on, they can check out your website, snscapitalgroup.com. That's snscapitalgroup.com. Right now, we're going to go to our round of insights. Are you ready?
Ready?
Give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
So I get a question similar to this from investors all the time, and I really struggle with it because I think it's just the way that I view failure. So like, I think I fail every day. Like, so I'm not the person that's going to sit here and say I don't fail, but it's how I then translate that in my mind. It's like, it's just a learning opportunity. So I like the way you asked it because it's like, how did you fail that then excelled you forward? And we talked about investment results are supported by operations supported by people. And where I have failed in my leadership is not being clear enough on expectations for the people to then push that back up that chain to produce the investment results. And so a failure of mine that has made me better is when I lack clarity as a leader, and it has forced me to become clearer and clearer with my expectations and how I deliver those expectations. And also as a company scales, how you deliver those changes a lot, right? Like I used to work hand in hand with everyone in our company, and now there's people in our company that's like I'm trying to get a chance to meet them, right? And so I have failed in how I convey clarity of my vision and expectations to the people who are actually out there executing on it.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
So we try not to overcomplicate things. So something that in 2023 we really focused on was getting rid of all the bells and whistles of like this extra software or this extra thing where for this process, we use AppFolio. So as a property management software. And in 2023, my brother, who's our COO and focus on operations, said, I'm pulling everything back into AppFolio. Like we're not going to this special app or this special software. And so I guess to answer your question, I would say AppFolio, but when you're trying to build a scalable business, try to have as few of those little softwares and things because when you're building training manuals and training processes, they're very confusing to other people unless it's in one spot.
Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Outlive by Peter Attia. So it has nothing to do with real estate, but it's like a health, wellness, longevity book. It's really good.
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Well, behind me, if there is people watching video, there's a cold plunge there. So most mornings I get up and I'll do this cold plunge, and every single morning I don't want to do it. And so it is an exercise in willpower to wake up in the morning. And my office is in my guest house. So I'm talking to you from my guest house here at my house. And I have to walk across my backyard, usually barefoot, straight out of bed. And right now, I think it's like 12 degrees in Cincinnati. Doing that and then jumping in the cold plunge is like a jump start to your willpower. And you're like, okay, got that done. And so that's a practice that has helped me succeed throughout this last year.
I love it. I love it. Well, love it for you, not for me. Give me your number one insight for being great at operations.
Well, I wish I had something different to say, but I think the best one is that kind of catchphrase I said before is like the operations are supported by the people. And so focusing on the values of the people you bring on to run those operations is how you succeed.
All right, let's lighten the mood. You are here in Cincinnati. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Favorite place. So I like Green Farm Juicery because they sell like smoothies and juices and stuff. It's super quick, easy, healthy. And my book Outlive is all about health and wellness. I would say behind real estate, that is the topic that I know the most about. And so eating healthy is really important to me, and nutrition. And that's a spot in Blue Ash, for those who are familiar with Cincinnati, that I go to quite a bit.
All right, we'll have to check that out. I think they have a couple locations, right?
Yeah, there's one in
There's a different. Okay, I think that was it. Okay. Well, I appreciate all your great information, Jered. It was great hearing more about your background from, being in high school and starting, with the eviction process and ultimately learning how to, get into full on construction, doing a flip projects with your brother and build that into $100 million real estate company working on apartments here in the Cincinnati market, and talking to us about operations, what it takes to be a best in class operator, understanding how important it is to have the right people, having those core values, and making sure you put those people in a position to succeed. And also talking to us a little about your investing philosophy, why you take more of a longer term approach to hold these assets and give yourself a little more flexibility to really focus on that core competency. Again, if anybody wants to learn more about you or your company, they can go to snscapitalgroup.com. Jered, thank you again for being a great guest. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you for the audience for listening to the story.